Before the world knew him as a Hollywood icon, Burt Lancaster was just a kid from East Harlem, born on November 2, 1913. He didn't grow up dreaming of the big screen. In fact, his childhood was tough and ordinary. His parents worked hard, money was tight, and the streets of New York were his playground. But even as a young man, Burt stood out. He was strong, athletic, and full of energy. That same fire that made him climb street lamps and jump fences would later make him one of the most commanding presences in film history. Before acting, Lancaster joined a circus troupe as an acrobat. For years, he swung through the air under the big top, performing breathtaking stunts that would later become part of his movie magic. That circus life built him, not just his body, but his confidence, timing, and charisma. Hollywood wasn't the first dream. In fact, it found him by accident. After leaving the circus, he worked small jobs until someone noticed him in a play. With his tall frame, piercing eyes, and undeniable magnetism, he was impossible to ignore. Soon, he was in front of a camera, and once he got there, he never left. His breakthrough came in The Killer's 1946, a dark film that made people see him as more than just handsome. He was complex, dangerous, human. Audiences fell in love instantly, and so did the studios. In a few short years, Lancaster went from being a street kid and circus acrobat to one of the biggest stars in America. But behind the fame, there was a different world. Old Hollywood wasn't just about glamour and lights, it was about secrets. During the 1940s and 1950s, the film industry was ruled by powerful studio bosses who controlled everything, from the roles actors played to how they lived their personal lives. If you were gay or even suspected of being gay, you could lose everything. Careers were destroyed overnight, and actors were forced to live double lives. It was a time of fear and silence. Publicly, everyone had to look perfect. Marriages were arranged, relationships were hidden, and emotions were often buried deep. This was the world Burt Lancaster entered, one filled with talent, ambition, and shadows. Lancaster's good looks and strong image made him the ideal leading man. He played heroes, soldiers, lovers, men who were bold, tough, and moral. But those who knew him personally said he was much more private and introspective. He wasn't like the typical Hollywood playboy. He kept his personal life locked away. That silence led to endless curiosity and speculation about who he really was. The world wanted to know everything: who he loved, what he believed in, and what kind of man he was off camera. But Lancaster never gave the press what they wanted. He let his films speak for him, and through them, people saw glimpses of his soul. By the early 1950s, Lancaster had become not only a star, but also a trailblazer. He formed his own production company, Hecht Hill Lancaster, which gave him rare independence. He used that freedom to make movies with depth, films that questioned society and pushed boundaries. Works like Marty, 1955, and Separate Tables, 1958, showed sides of life that Hollywood usually ignored: loneliness, fear, and forbidden love. These themes resonated with audiences because they hinted at emotions that many people, including Hollywood's closeted actors, could relate to but could never express openly. Lancaster may not have spoken about the secrets of others, but he understood the pain of living under constant scrutiny. As Lancaster's fame grew, so did the myths around him. He was seen as a symbol of masculinity, powerful, commanding, and intense. On screen, he could play the romantic hero or the ruthless villain with equal conviction. But fame in Hollywood was rarely a gift without a price. The bigger you became, the less freedom you had. Every move was watched, every friendship questioned, every rumor magnified. Many of Lancaster's peers, talented men and women, were forced to live secret lives because being openly different could ruin them. The entertainment world of that era operated under a strict moral code enforced by studios and gossip magazines. Everyone had to fit a perfect image, and anyone who didn't risked losing everything. Lancaster, by nature, was a private man. He didn't enjoy interviews or the endless parties that other stars attended. Instead, he focused on his craft. Still, he wasn't afraid to take risks, both professionally and personally. His films often explored human vulnerability and emotional conflict. In Elmer Gantry, 1960, he played a preacher torn between faith and sin, a role that earned him his first Academy Award. In Birdman of Alcatraz, 1962, he became a man transformed by compassion, showing the soft heart inside a hardened soul. These roles seemed to mirror parts of his own inner world, a man struggling with control, morality, and truth in a place that demanded perfection. Off-screen, Lancaster was known for being strong-willed and outspoken. He wasn't afraid to challenge the Hollywood system. He believed in equality and justice and spoke out against racism and social unfairness. In the 1960s, he used his fame to support civil rights movements, marching for freedom and using his voice when many stars stayed silent. Together with his wife, Norma Anderson, he raised funds for Martin Luther King Jr. and stood by the principles of fairness and humanity. At a time when being political was risky for actors, Lancaster's courage showed a different kind of bravery, one that went beyond the screen. Still, the world of Hollywood was full of hidden stories. Many of the era's most famous stars, men like Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter, and others, were forced to hide their true selves. The pressure to conform was immense. Magazines published fake romances, studios arranged marriages. Everything was done to protect the illusion. While Lancaster never publicly discussed rumors about anyone, it was clear he understood the pain of living in a world where truth had to be disguised. Some say he was sympathetic, even protective, of actors who lived in fear of exposure. He worked with many who were whispered about but treated them all with respect. Lancaster's personal life was just as complex as his screen roles. He was married multiple times and had 5 children. Yet there was always a sense that he kept part of himself hidden, not necessarily a dark secret, but a private truth. He avoided the gossip and the glamour, preferring the company of close friends, artists, and thinkers. He read deeply, believed in human rights, and often challenged the hypocrisy he saw in Hollywood. Those who knew him described him as passionate but guarded, intense but kind. He lived by his own code, and in a town full of masks, that made him both admired and misunderstood as he moved into the later years of his career. Lancaster continued to take on daring projects. The Swimmer 1968 was a surreal, haunting film that explored loneliness and identity themes that mirrored the disillusionment of the time. Later, in Atlantic City 1980, he portrayed an aging gangster clinging to his past glory. That performance earned him yet another Oscar nomination, proving that even decades into his career, he could still surprise audiences with emotional honesty. Through these films, Lancaster gave audiences something rare: vulnerability. He showed that strength wasn't about hiding pain, it was about facing it. By the 1980s, Burt Lancaster had become more than an actor, he was a living legend. He had survived Hollywood's golden age, reinvented himself through decades of change, and earned respect not only for his talent but for his integrity. Yet, as he grew older, the world around him was changing too. The entertainment industry was becoming more open, more honest, and more willing to confront the truths it had buried for years. The whispers that once filled Hollywood's halls were finally being spoken aloud. Many of Lancaster's peers who had lived in silence were finally finding their voices. The culture of fear that had shaped old Hollywood was slowly fading away. Looking back, it's easy to see how Lancaster became a symbol of strength and complexity. His films often reflected the struggles people faced in real life: the desire to be free, the fear of being judged, and the courage to stand up for what you believe in. Even though he never spoke about the rumors that surrounded him or others, his empathy toward people who were different showed in his work and his actions. He didn't need to make grand statements. His respect for others and his refusal to join in Hollywood's cruelty spoke volumes. In that way, he quietly challenged the system. In interviews later in life, Lancaster reflected more on his art than his fame. He once said that acting wasn't just about pretending, it was about discovering the truth of a person. That belief guided his performances and perhaps his life. He didn't chase gossip or attention. He chased meaning. Even when he disagreed with Hollywood politics, he never stopped believing in the power of storytelling to change hearts. That belief in honesty, empathy, and courage became his true legacy. Burt Lancaster passed away in 1994, leaving behind a filmography filled with depth, beauty, and humanity. To this day, his name carries weight, not only as a star but as a man who represented an era of contradictions. He came from nothing, rose to greatness, and faced a world that demanded perfection but rarely offered understanding. He lived through decades when secrets could destroy lives, and though he never revealed his own, he gave others hope by showing that authenticity, even in small ways, could survive in a place built on illusion. Old Hollywood was full of stories that were never told, stories of love, fear, and hidden truths. Burt Lancaster's journey reminds us that behind every glamorous photo and famous smile, there was a person searching for acceptance and meaning. Whether the rumors were true or not, they reflect a time when people had to hide who they were to be loved by the world. Lancaster's legacy is not one of scandal, but of compassion. A man who lived boldly, fought for justice, and helped shape cinema into something deeper and more human. Today, as we look back at that golden era, it's clear that Burt Lancaster was more than a movie star. He was a mirror to his time, reflecting both its brilliance and its flaws. His story isn't just about fame, it's about freedom, identity, and the courage to stay true to oneself in a world that often demanded silence. And perhaps that's the greatest truth he ever left behind. Burt Lancaster was one of the brightest stars of Hollywood's golden age. Known for his strong jaw, athletic frame, and magnetic screen presence, he seemed to embody the idea of the perfect leading man. Audiences loved his bold characters: soldiers, rebels, adventurers, and the press portrayed him as a man's man, full of confidence and charm. But behind that powerful image was a far more complex person. Someone who lived through deep struggles, emotional pain, and hidden parts of his identity that he never dared to share publicly for most of his life. Lancaster was married several times, and his relationships were often marked by turbulence. His first marriages began with passion and excitement, but slowly fell apart under the weight of fame and the demands of a film career that never stopped. By the mid-1960s, his second marriage had collapsed completely. He and his wife separated in 1966, and the divorce became final 3 years later. For a man admired by millions, he spent a surprising amount of time feeling alone. The constant travel, the pressure to stay at the top, and the need to maintain a certain image wore him down. Around this time, while filming The Professionals, he began a relationship with Jackie Bone, a talented Hollywood hairdresser. Their romance burned hot, full of energy, love, and, at times, anger. People who knew them said the two could light up a room with laughter one moment and be shouting at each other the next. There was one shocking night when Jackie, in the middle of a crowded dinner party, attended by big names like director Sidney Pollack and actor Peter Falk, smashed a wine bottle over Lancaster's head after a heated argument. It was the kind of drama that seemed taken straight from one of his own movies. The relationship survived for a while after that, but eventually ended when Jackie went through a deep religious conversion. Lancaster respected her decision but could not follow her down that spiritual path. By then he had grown weary of turmoil and longed for quiet companionship. He would find that many years later when he met Susan Martin, a woman who gave him peace rather than passion. They married in 1990, and although Lancaster's health was already beginning to fail, the two shared a calm, loving life together. Susan stayed by his side until his death in 1994. Yet during those later years, when the crowds were gone and his body could no longer do the stunts he was once famous for, Burt reportedly began to open up to a few trusted friends. He talked not about fame or awards but about the personal side of his life, the side that had always stayed hidden. According to people close to him, he quietly revealed that during his years in Hollywood he had loved not only women but men as well, including some of the most famous male stars of his time. In an era when homosexuality could destroy a career overnight, these relationships had been kept secret. To understand his story, we have to remember the time he lived in. In the 1940s and 1950s, studio executives controlled everything: the movies, the press, even the private lives of their stars. Actors signed contracts that demanded they appear straight, wholesome, and family-friendly. Anyone suspected of being gay faced not only public shame, but the end of their livelihood. So like many others, Lancaster kept his true feelings hidden behind the golden curtain of Hollywood glamour. Among the names Lancaster reportedly shared with his friends was one that shocked everyone: Cary Grant. Grant was known around the world for his elegant style, his smooth voice, and the easy confidence that made him the ultimate romantic lead. Off-screen, however, Grant was intensely private. For years, the press had speculated about his friendship with actor Randolph Scott, with whom he shared a home for more than a decade, but neither man ever confirmed or denied the rumors. According to those who later heard Lancaster's recollections, he and Grant met at a Hollywood function sometime in the late 1940s. Both were already established stars, admired for their charisma, yet each carried his own kind of loneliness. Lancaster described their attraction as electric but cautious. They would escape for short weekends along the Pacific Coast Highway, staying in small beach houses where they could simply be themselves. Grant, though, was always aware of the risk. He had spent his whole career building the image of a perfect gentleman, and the fear of scandal haunted him. In the end, that fear pushed him to end the affair. Lancaster later said that he understood. He was a man trapped by his own perfection. He reportedly told a friend. Another name that appeared in Lancaster's quiet confessions was one no one expected: J. Edgar Hoover, the powerful and controversial director of the FBI. Hoover was not an actor, but he had enormous influence in Hollywood. He made sure that films portrayed law enforcement in a good light, and many stars attended his charity events in Washington. Lancaster supposedly met him at one of those gatherings. What began as a professional acquaintance grew into something strange and secretive. Lancaster later described Hoover as a man starved for affection but terrified of being seen. Their connection was brief, uneasy, and filled with tension. For Lancaster, it offered a look into a lonely soul who could not admit what he wanted. For Hoover, it was a risk he could never acknowledge publicly. Then there was Rock Hudson, one of the biggest stars of the 1950s. Tall, handsome, and beloved by millions of fans, Hudson was Hollywood's idea of the perfect man. But behind the charming smile, he lived in constant fear that someone would expose the truth about his sexuality. When he met Lancaster on a movie set in the early 1950s, the two reportedly became close. They would take long drives into the desert or spend quiet weekends away from the paparazzi. Lancaster later described Hudson as a gentle soul with a gladiator's body, someone who wanted to love freely but felt trapped by the expectations around him. Their relationship, according to Lancaster's recollection, ended not because of a lack of affection but because of the world they lived in, a world where two men in love could never truly be themselves. When Hudson died in 1985 from AIDS-related complications, the truth of his hidden life came to light, and many in Hollywood finally began to understand how much he had suffered. Lancaster reportedly grieved deeply when he heard the news, remembering not just the actor but the person he had known long ago. One of the most surprising connections Lancaster revealed was with Ricky Nelson, the teenage idol from The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Nelson was nearly 20 years younger, and his career had taken off when he was still a child. Growing up under the public eye left him insecure and eager for guidance. Lancaster, already a seasoned veteran of Hollywood, became both a mentor and, for a short time, a lover. The age difference and the social barriers made their relationship impossible to maintain. But Lancaster spoke of Nelson with great tenderness. He once described him as the boy who sang like a breeze and kissed with the hunger of someone who had never been allowed to want. The affair ended gently, with Lancaster encouraging Nelson to find his own identity and follow his own path. Nelson would later go on to struggle with fame, music, and personal demons until his tragic death in a plane crash in 1985. Finally, there was Marlon Brando, perhaps the most complicated of them all. Brando was everything Lancaster was not: impulsive, wild, and unafraid to challenge every rule. They met in the late 1950s at a political event where Hollywood's biggest names had gathered to speak about social justice. The two actors were drawn to each other instantly. Lancaster admired Brando's brilliance and rebellion, while Brando was fascinated by Lancaster's discipline and quiet strength. Their relationship, according to those who heard about it, was volcanic, full of desire, arguments, and creative energy. They would debate politics, art, and philosophy for hours, and then, as Lancaster once reportedly said, end the night in silence, both too proud to admit how much we needed each other. The affair flickered on and off for several years until the weight of secrecy and their clashing egos finally broke it apart. These rumored relationships, never confirmed publicly, but whispered about among people who knew Lancaster best, painted a much different picture of the man behind the movie star. The world saw Burt Lancaster as a fearless hero, a champion, a symbol of masculine strength, but those who truly knew him understood that he was also sensitive, thoughtful, and searching for something real in a world built on illusion. His life was a reflection of Hollywood itself, full of bright lights and dark corners. As the years went on and Hollywood began to change, Lancaster became more reflective. He started to take on roles that challenged the traditional ideas of masculinity he had once represented. Films like Atlantic City and Field of Dreams showed him as an older, wiser man who had learned the cost of living behind a mask. Friends say that in his later life, he spoke openly about the pain of pretending, not only on screen but in his personal relationships. He understood how damaging secrecy could be, how it could twist love into something fragile and fearful. In quiet conversations, he reportedly said that he did not share his stories for attention or shock value. He simply wanted to tell the truth about his own heart before it was too late. In many ways, Lancaster's late-life honesty mirrors a wider truth about old Hollywood, a time when many talented people hid parts of themselves to survive. The studios controlled the image of every star. They arranged fake dates, invented publicity stories, and erased anything that didn't fit their version of perfection. People like Rock Hudson, Cary Grant, and others had to live double lives just to keep working. Lancaster's reflections reveal how painful that world could be for anyone who didn't fit neatly into society's expectations. Even someone as powerful and respected as he was could not escape the fear of being found out.